The threat was real. Rome would not last forever. But you've got to know that this image is of more than just the Parthians. The white horse and its rider go forth to conquer. See, the reality is that this is the way of human history. Those with crowns go out to conquer. It's been this way since the Garden of Eden. Humans have been building their own kingdoms and propping up their own kings in rebellion against the undisputed king and his kingdom. There is a bloodlust among the powerful of the earth to have more and more dominion, and that's what this white horse represents. The lust for power and war that results from the lust for power. You know very well that in the last couple of weeks, the President of the United States has been involved in a Twitter spat with the leader of the North Koreans. And they've been arguing over the size of their nuclear buttons. And the earth cowers in terror. This first horse and its rider would have sent a very clear message to the Roman powers that be, but it sends a very clear message to all who will listen that the way of life on this earth is the way of conquest, and conquest comes by war. And so the other horses that follow present the fallout. In our lust for power, we shed blood, theirs and ours. In the aftermath of war, there is great inflation and famine. The countryside is devastated, and so prices go up, and trade is suspended, and production is suspended. And then comes the last horse, the pale green horse, death and Hades. Death comes along, mopping up the whole enterprise. What John sees here is not just the current state of affair for the Romans, living in constant fear of the Parthians, fear that their power would be undone. What John sees here is the current state of affairs, period. Human beings in rebellion to God, abusing each other, and turning the whole planet into what Donald Trump would call a hellhole. Now the question is this God's judgment? Is He sending these horses out to judge? Or is this simply the end result of the way that we humans have taken? And the answer, of course, is yes. This is what the world looks like when its inhabitants go their own way and do their own thing in rebellion against God. God has a plan and purpose for His creation, and when we rebel against it, do we bring God's judgment on ourselves? Sure we do. How do we? We sow the seeds of our own destruction by not doing things God's way. This is exactly the picture that Paul paints in Romans 1 when he says humans have decided that there is no God. They've set themselves up as God. They seek no other good but their own self-satisfaction, and in doing so, they bring on themselves the due penalty of their path. These four horsemen are here. We are living not in a world of God's making, but in a world of our own. And it's not a pretty picture. And sometimes, maybe even oftentimes, God's people get caught up in it. And so in the second scene, John sees saints under the altar. Look at verse 9. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, "O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth?" Then they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. These are God's people who refused to play the imperial games. These are God's people who refused to bow the knee to illegitimate kings. And because they did, they paid the price for it. They paid socially, as they were ostracized from their families and their communities. They paid the price for it economically, as they refused to do business the way everybody else did business, as they refused to meet at the patron saint's temple and pray for prayers and blessings on their business. And some of them even paid for it physically, accused as traitors to the crown and executed. Well, in this scene, John sees up in heaven what has become of those who rebelled against the empire. And he says that they have sacrificed their lives to be true to the true king. He says what they did is that they became sacrifices on God's altar, and their blood has dripped down and been collected under God's altar. And from there, they cry out for vindication. Vindicate us, God. From there, they cry out for honor. Honor our sacrifices, God. From there, they cry out for vengeance. Avenge our deaths, God. You see, on earth, they had been found to be rebels. On earth, they had been found to be traitors. And on earth, the courts pronounced a guilty verdict and executed them. And what they're asking for now is for that order to be vacated, for that charge to be overturned, and for them to be raised up like Jesus was. The earthly courts may hand out their judgments, but God overturns them. And I know this is true because these are all given white robes to wear. White, the color of purity, but more importantly, the color of innocence. God in His court declares them to be innocent, but God in His court tells them to wait a little longer, but God tells them that there is more to come. More will die because of the Word of God. More will become sacrifices because they testified that there was another king and another kingdom, and they refused to live the lie of the life of the empire. And so they're told it's going to get worse before it gets better. Now they can rest assured that it will get better, because in the third scene, John sees God bringing judgment on the rebels. Look at verse 12. When He opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake. And the sun became black as sackcloth, and the full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, like the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a strong wind. The sky vanished like a scroll that's being rolled up. And every mountain and island were removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone in the rebellion, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and the rocks, "Fall on us, hide us from the face of him who's seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb." That's a weird image. The wrath of the Lamb. Bah! For the great day of their wrath has come. And who can stand? This is the most terrifying scene in the chapter, as God's judgment breaks into this sphere in unimaginable ways. Unimaginable, but not unknown. All of these scenes here are used by the prophets to describe judgment language. All of these things come from Isaiah 34 or Joel 2 or Zephaniah 1. When the prophets were trying to describe to Israel the fall of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, things that they could not imagine, the prophets would say, well, it's like this. Imagine the sun exploding. Imagine the stars falling. I know it seems unimaginable, but that's what it's like. You see, these images are meant to strike terror in the heart. Can you imagine walking out from class one day and staring up at the sky and the sun being gone? No, we did that the first day of school in the fall, didn't we? Okay, how about this? I've had this recurring dream for the last several years. I'll have this dream every so often. Now, it's been a while since I've had it. But it's always the same thing. I am together with a colleague that I don't particularly like. And we are out staring up at the sun, and we see a missile or something shoot the sun, and it explodes. Now, I'm not asking you to interpret it for me, because I don't know that I want to know. I'm asking you if you can picture it. What kind of terror would you feel if you saw that? I know it's not the same thing, but every time I read this text, I can't help but think of this scene from sort of a scary movie. You've maybe seen it. It's Independence Day. The cosmic signs in the sky communicate that everything is about to change. The tables are about to be turned. And when the great day of the Lord comes, all those who've lived in rebellion to the undisputed King will be forced to face Him. They will be forced to give an account for what they've done, and it's terrifying. How would you respond if your worst nightmare came to life on the big screen and then came off of it? John sees those who have rebelled against the King, those who have abused their power on the earth, begging to be hidden from the great day of the King's wrath. They'd rather be crushed by the mountains than have to meet their Maker. And the scene is so scary that it ends with this cry, "Who can stand?" Well, there's one group that can. And John's going to tell us all about them in chapter 7, so you're going to have to wait for next week to figure out who it is. There's one group that can stand, but it's not the kings. It's not the great ones. It's not the generals. It's not the rich. It's not the powerful. It's not the rebels, slave or free. None of the usual winners will be able to stand on the day of the Lord. It's the losers who will stand. It's those who've sacrificed their lives. It's those who've remained true to the true King. They will stand. And I'll tell you more about them next week. But let me ask you this week, when the great day of the Lord comes, would you rather hide under the mountains or hide under the altar? God is going to get you either way. The question is, where will He find you? Under the mountains or under the altar? Some of you know Psalm 139. You know it by heart. It's a gorgeous psalm. It is a comforting psalm. A cappella has recorded it several times. You are there. You are there. If I rise on the wings of dawn, if I settle by the sea, I know your hand is always there to guide me. Y'all heard that song? It says, word for word from Psalm 39, if I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I go down to the grave, you're there. North, south, east, west, wherever I go, you're there. And what a wonderful comfort that there's nothing, Romans 8, that can separate us from God's presence. No matter what kind of bad stuff happens to us, God is there. Compare it with Amos 9. In Amos 9, the exact same words are used. If I go to the heavens, you're there. If I go to the grave, you're there. North, south, east, and west, wherever I go, you are there. Except the image is of God coming in judgment and telling the people of Israel, you will not be able to hide. He's going to get you one way or the other. Will He find you under the mountains, begging to be hidden? Or will He find you hidden with Him under His altar? There is not a lot of hope in this chapter. For those of you who don't like hellfire and brimstone preaching, I'm just the messenger. We can't avoid these texts because they tell the truth. And there's a lot of truth in this Revelation 6. Let me give you 4 to take home real quick. The truth is that God is, in fact, in complete control of all these events. You notice it's the Lord who's breaking the seals, bringing the judgments. It's the 4 living creatures calling forth the judgments. God is in complete control. And there is a little hope here because you notice right now, only 1/4 are affected. As the cycles continue, there will be 1/3 affected. And then finally, everything will be affected. So there's a little bit of mercy here, but God's in complete control of it, even of this disaster. Another truth in this text is that the sin and the rebellion that have characterized the way of this world will be crushed by God. There is coming a day when God is going to make the wrongs right. He is going to balance the accounts of history, and you can bet on it. But here's the third truth. Until that day comes, more and more of us are going to be convicted of crimes against the empire and are going to be called to make the ultimate sacrifice in order to be true to our heavenly King and our heavenly kingdom. Now, there are some of you that you hear about persecution of Christians and you scoff, you mock, you say nobody in the United States of America suffers. You know, Christianity Today, just this last week, published the top 10 places on the globe where Christians are persecuted. And you're right, the United States of America is not in the top 10. And as far as I know, there's nobody holding a sword to your throat saying, renounce Christ or die. But nobody was in Revelation either, yet. Don't you understand that? They were being fired from their jobs, written out of their wills. They were being excluded from the Chamber of Commerce. It eventually would get to the point where they would die. And I'm telling you, we live in a country right now where Christian business owners are told by the government, you will do it our way or you will not do it. We will ruin you. Don't be naive. The four horsemen are here, and we are living out the cycles as described in Revelation. And just because we're not dying yet doesn't mean we won't be called to. God promises us it will get worse before it gets better. The question is, will you be able to survive it? You can capitulate. You can compromise. You can play ball by their rules. And you'll find yourself wanting to be covered by the mountains when the Lord comes back. Or you can maintain your faithfulness. You can refuse to compromise even if it costs you your education, even if it costs you your job, even if it costs you your family, even if it costs you your life. But you do that and God will consider your life to be a sacrifice. And whatever verdict that the courts of the earth pass on you, God will overturn them. Just like He did with Jesus when He raised Him from the dead. The great day of the Lord is coming, and where will you be found? Under the mountains or under the altar? You can settle it this morning. Why don't you just go ahead and die this morning and get it over with? Settle the score this morning. Go ahead and give your life to the true King. Die to yourself. In Christianity, we practice a rite called baptism, where we honor the Lamb worthy to open the scrolls because He didn't play by the world's power. They killed Him, God raised Him up, and when we follow Him, we die and God raises us up. In baptism, we leave the ways of the world, confess our allegiance to the Lamb, and symbolically we die and are resurrected. And the Apostle Paul says we can rest assured that if we've died with Him in baptism, we will rise with Him in resurrection. Under the mountains or under the altar? You make the decision while we stand and sing.
There's a great day coming, a great day coming. There's a great day coming by and by, when the saints and the sinners shall be parted right and left. Are you ready for that day to come? There's a bright day coming, a bright day coming. There's a bright day coming by and by, but its brightness shall only come to them that love the Lord. Are you ready for that day to come? There's a sad day coming, a sad day coming. There's a sad day coming by and by, when the sinner shall hear his doom depart. I know ye not. Are you ready?